The question at the center of Micah's message is one that we still ask today. What does God really want of us? And if we're honest, most people of faith ask this question sooner or later. What does God really expect? What counts as faithful living? And how do we know if we're getting it right? Micah sets this scene up like a courtroom. The mountains and the hills are called as witnesses, like they've been watching this relationship from the beginning between God and God's people. And that's a very long time. Since the days of Abraham and Sarah, since Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah and Rachel, generation after generation, this whole story of promise and hope, failure and mercy, and beginning again. It's important to take notice here that when God first speaks, there's no accusation. God begins by jogging the people's memory, by reminding the people of their rescue, of their freedom, of God's faithful guidance and patience with them, saying, remember how I brought you out of slavery? Remember how I stayed with you? Remember how I provided those leaders and direction? This is a relationship that begins with grace and love, not demands. But the people answer with anxiety and perhaps even accusation. Like, they start asking nervous questions, and I can almost hear the sarcasm in their voice as they ask the questions of God. So what should I bring? What will be enough, God? Burnt offerings? Bigger sacrifices? Something costly? Something extreme? It's almost as if they're trying to negotiate some sort of terms, saying, just tell me the price, God. We'll pay it. It's a very human response because I like them. We like checklists. We like knowing the minimum requirements so we'll be able to say, that's done. But Micah says that's not how it works. God's not looking for good works in a transactional style. God desperately wants to be in relationship with us. God's not asking for a religious performance, but instead asking us to live a certain way. To have a walking around faith, like with all my shoes this morning. A walking around faith that shows up in how we treat people, especially those who are vulnerable, overlooked, and pushed aside, and even those who we deem as our enemies, the ones who we would put in the other category, the other side of the argument. This idea of caring for others goes all the way back to the promise God made to Abraham and Sarah. God told them that they were going to be blessed. Yea, I'm going to be blessed. And then God says, so that you can bless other people, so the world can be blessed through you and your descendants. The gift of blessing was never meant to stop with them. It was meant to move out into the world. And that's still true for us today. We're blessed, and we receive that, and we're called to go out and bless the world. Our faith is not meant to stay inside our homes and our heads, inside these church walls. We're called to live it out, and we do that. We heard about the food pantry this morning. We heard about choirs singing to help us point ourselves back, our faith back to God. We're called to live it out, this fairness, this compassion, this mercy, this generosity and humility. And here's where we need that Matthew passage that Lita read for us today, the Beatitudes, because if all we hear is go out and be a blessing, sooner or later we just get tired. We get discouraged. We get overwhelmed. We start to feel like everything depends on us. That if we don't fix it, help it, or carry it, then it won't get done. And that was never the message in its full form. When Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, God's not praising some spiritual superhero, but rather naming people who are in need, people who know that they are in need, people who are hurting, people who are worn thin, people who long for things to be made right. In other words, people like us. Micah tells us what faithful living looks like: justice and kindness and humility. Jesus tells us who God draws near to: the hurting, the searching, the weary, the ones who know they cannot carry everything on their own. Two sides of the same coin. One side says you are blessed to bless, and the other side says you also are in need of blessing. There's an interesting study I ran across where researchers once took a look at parole decisions made by judges over the course of a day. Now, you might expect those decisions to depend mostly on the facts in the case, but what they found was pretty surprising, and I admit I was a little unnerved by it. The biggest factor was actually the time of day when they came through the docket. Early in the morning or right after a break, parole was granted far more often. Late in the day when the judges were tired and mentally worn down, it almost never was granted. Now, the judges weren't cruel. They were human. The study showed something called decision fatigue. When we get tired, our ability to extend generosity and patience drops, often without us even noticing it. Kind of like those Snickers, I think they're Snickers commercials, where you need a break. I forget what the line is, but you need a Snicker, and they eat the bite of the Snicker, and all of a sudden things change. Like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here, right? I was hungry. I needed to refresh myself. I needed some blessing. And this matters for how we hear Micah. The prophet's not talking about villains. He's talking about regular people, faithful people, and yet tired people. People who want to do what is right, but sometimes can't always see clearly. People like us. Which is exactly why Micah doesn't say be perfect. Instead, Micah gives us some practices that we can live out every day. When we hold Micah and the Beatitudes together, we get a more full, honest picture of faith. We are blessed to bless, and we are blessed through others. We live our faith outward, and we receive God's care inward. We're not the only ones who give mercy. We are also the ones who need mercy. We're not only the ones who offer kindness, we depend on kindness for ourselves. And we're not only the ones who stand up for justice, we are people who need others to stand up for us too. And often God answers that need through other people, through the friend who checks in at the right moment, the neighbor who shows up, the church that surrounds someone in prayer, the quiet encouragement that keeps a person going, ordinary acts that turn out to be holy ones. This is the life that God is calling us to. God's calling us into deeper love, everyday mercy, and walking humbly with God and with one another. A relationship shaped by God's grace and love from the beginning to the end.